with the 8th lesson, Box and Cox. Here the lesson is Box and Cox. It is a one-act play. Play means it's in the form of a drama or a skit, right? So firstly I will tell you about the writer, John Madison Moron. He was Mrs. Bouncer. It is box. To Cox that box is in the attic. She said to Box that Cox is in the attic. Hello friends, welcome back to our channel. Today I am with the new session with the 8th lesson, Box and Cox, from the Telangana State Intermediate First Year English textbook. Thank you for subscribing our channel, children. Kindly share with as many friends as possible. And if you have any doubts regarding any grammar or vocabulary part, just let me know in the comment section. Sooner I will be making the videos on syllables, on phonetics, as well as on the other aspects of grammar. For active and passive voice and degrees of comparison, I have already done for the 10th standard. You can refer in our channel playlist. Come, let's get into the session. Here the lesson is Box and Cox. It is a one-act play. Play means it's in the form of a drama or a skit, right? So firstly I will tell you about the writer, John Madison Moron. He was born into a well-known dramatist family in England on 3rd January 1811. So this is in the English, that is pure English language which is used in England. Maybe that is why you find it a little bit difficult to understand. This is called Old English. Okay, and then following his father's footsteps, he took to writing plays. Madison's Morton wrote dozens of humorous one-act plays, two-act plays, and finally three-act plays. His plays won for him fame and lots of wealth. As they were very interesting, he became very famous with these plays. They also helped many actors establish themselves as great artists. He was able to write as well at 80 as at 30. Yes, yet in his last days he had to live on a pension. Yeah, though he grew rich and famous, he had to live on pension. He died in London on 19th December 1891. So this says that the writer's life did not go well financially, yet not to worry. Here he has given us an interesting skit. Firstly, let me introduce the characters to you. Here the first character is Mrs. Bouncer. Mrs. Bouncer is the landlady or the house owner. Here it is written as landlady. You can understand it as the house owner. Okay. And another one, the first one, that is box. Here this box is a printer. Printer means he works in an offset company, printing press. He is a printer and he works at night. Therefore, he stays at daytime. Stays at day in the house. Okay. And next one is Cox. Okay. And here Cox works in a hat shop. He sells hats. Okay, he makes hats and he sells hats. Yeah, he works in a hat shop at night. Works in a hat shop all through the day and occupies a room at night. Stays at night in the room. Okay, you can understand it this way. This house owner, Mrs. Bouncer, she has given one room only for rent for 2 people. Okay, and in that house, in the daytime, this box stays because he works in the night shift. This box works in the night shift in the printing press. So he stays at daytime in the house and Cox stays at night in the house. So she has double rent for one room. Can you understand that? So one house, in the night one stays, he goes off, she arranges all the things, and then the next one comes and again she arranges the things. When they go like that, she manages to get 2 rents for one room. Okay, so this lesson is very lengthy, so I will just tell you whatever is the meaning of the dialogue. Okay, a room fairly well furnished in the center, an old fashioned bed with curtains around it. So this is about the furniture and the room setting. Cox, dressed with the exception of his coat, is looking at himself in a small looking glass which he holds in his hand. Cox. What does Cox say? I have half a mind to register an oath that I'll never have my hair cut again. So he is looking at his appearance in the mirror and telling my haircut is like this, I won't do it, all as he is discussing. And then 8 o'clock. I look as if I had just cropped for the army, and I was particularly emphatic in my instructions to the hairdresser, only cut the ends off. He must have thought I meant the other ends. Never mind, I shan't meet anybody worth troubling about so early. 8 o'clock, I declare I haven't a moment to lose. Fate has placed me with the most punctual and particular of hatters, and I must fulfill my destiny. Now, who is this Cox? Cox is a hat maker. So he stays in the night and it's 8 o'clock in the morning. He has to rush up to his office or rush up to his shop. Okay. And Mrs. B means Mrs. Bouncer, says, good morning, Mr. Cox. I hope you slept comfortably, Mr. Cox, she says. And then Cox says, I can't say I did, Mrs. B. I should feel obliged to you if you could accommodate with a more protuberant bolster, Mrs. B. So what do you mean by bolster? Here you have the meaning over here. Bolster means a large round pillow. Round shaped pillow. He is not comfortable with the pillow. Generally in the foreign countries, they give the furniture, mattress, the cot, the cupboard, everything. Okay. So here in his house, Mrs. Bouncer, that is in the house, in the room, Mrs. Bouncer has given the cot, mattress and the pillow. He says he is not comfortable with the pillow. The one I have got now seems to have about a handful and a half of feathers at each end and nothing whatever in the middle. So it's not comfortable. Both sides are big and in the middle where I keep my head there is nothing. So give me a good bolster, he says. Mrs. B, anything to accommodate you, Mr. Cox? So she says she will arrange the pillow. Cox says, thank you. Then perhaps you'll be good enough to hold this glass while I finish my toilet. And then Mrs. B says, certainly. Why, I do declare you have had your haircut. Actually, maybe the haircut is strange, so she is commenting on the haircut. And Cox says, cut. It strikes me I have had it mowed. It's very kind of you to mention it, but I am sufficiently conscious of the absurdity of my personal appearance already. Now for my hat, that's the effect of having one's haircut. This hat fitted me quite tight before. Luckily, I have got 2 or 3 more. Now, this is pleasant, never mind. This one appears to me to wobble about rather less than the others, and now I am off. By the by, Mrs. Bouncer, I should like to call your attention to the fact that has been evident to me for some time past, and that is my colds go remarkably fast. Now, what this Cox is telling is his coal. You know coal? Generally in the foreign countries it's very cold. So they light the coal and they make a fireplace, as well as they use, you might have seen the barbecue. In that they light the coal like an oven. On that they put the grills and they heat the food. So that is how it goes. So he says the coal is getting over very quick. I am not using it so much. I don't know why it's getting over. And then Mrs. B says, Lord, my Cox. Lord means Lord, my Lord. L-O-R is the short form. Yeah. And then Cox. It's not the case only with the coals, Mrs. Bouncer. I have lately observed a gradual and steady increase of evaporation among my candles, wood, sugar and matches. Not only the coal, he is saying his candle is also getting melted away. He is not using so much. And then wood, which they use for the fireplace, and the sugar, as well as the matches. Matches means the sticks in the matchbox, matchsticks. All these are getting completed very quickly. He is complaining to Mrs. Bouncer. And then Mrs. Bouncer says, Lord, my Cox, you surely don't suspect me. So she says, is it that you are doubting me, that I used all your materials? Cox says, I don't say I do, Mrs. B. Only I wish you distinctly to understand that I don't believe it's the cat. So he says, if not you, who else will do? Cats cannot use all these things. That is what he means. Mrs. Bouncer says, is there anything else you have got to grumble about, sir? So are there any complaints? She is asking. And then Cox says, grumble? Mrs. Bouncer, do you possess such a thing as a dictionary? And Mrs. B says, no, sir. Then Cox says, then I'll lend you one, and if you turn to the letter G, you will find grumble, verb neuter, to complain without cause. Now that's not my case, Mrs. B, and now that we are on the subject, I wish to know how it is that I very often find my apartment full of smoke. So what he says is, grumble means complaining without cause, but I have a cause, all my things are getting finished without me using it. So I have a reason, that's not grumble, don't use the word grumble, he says. And then Mrs. B says, why, I suppose the chimney. Then Cox says, the chimney doesn't smoke tobacco. I am speaking of tobacco smoke. Mrs. B, I hope. Mrs. B, you are guilty of cheroots or Havanas? Havanas and cheroots. Here we will see in the glossary, Havanas and cheroots means cigars. They are also spelled as cheroot, and Havanas are cigars of a famous brand from Cuba. And not only this one, he says that there is a cigarette smoke smell. His room is full of smoke of cigar. So what he says is, not only all these are getting completed, even the cigarette smell is coming. Is it that you smoke all the this Havanas or cheroots, that all the smoke is coming into my room, he is asking her. And then she says, not me, Mr. Cox. And then Cox says, not partial to a pipe? Are you not addicted to cigar? He says, no, sir. Then Cox says, then how is it that? Then Mrs. Bouncer says, why, I suppose yes, that must be it. Cox says, at present I am entirely of your opinion, because I haven't the most distant particle of any idea what you mean. Then Mrs. Bouncer says, why, the gentleman who has got the attic is hardly ever without a pipe in his mouth, and there he sits with his feet upon the mantelpiece. So attic means the upper part of the room. Generally in the foreign countries, what they do is, the downstairs, if this is a house, downstairs there is the room, and on the upper roof, that is a wooden one. Generally you might have seen in the Nobita, Heidi, all those cartoon movies, you might have seen there is an upper part. Swami and his friends, upper part, that is called the attic. So she says that there is another tenant who stays in the attic and he always smokes. Maybe that is the reason why the smoke has entered your room, she tries to justify. The mantelpiece, that strikes me as being considerable stretch, either of your imagination, Mrs. B, or of the gentleman's legs. I presume you mean the fender or the hob. Mrs. B says, sometimes one, sometimes the other. Well, there he sits for hours and puffs away into the fireplace. So he keeps on smoking, that's the reason, she says. Then Cox says, then you mean to say that this gentleman smoked, instead of emulating the example of all other sorts of smoke and going up the chimney, thinks proper to effect a singularity by taking the contrary direction. So what he says, in case he is smoking, that should go through the chimney out. Why is he taking a direction, taking a twist direction and coming to my room? So he is wondering, actual reason is, she gives the same room for rent for Box as well as Cox. I told you before only. Actually, when Box is in the room, he smokes. He is using all these things. That is why it is all getting disappeared. But she doesn't want to accept the truth. So she is covering up, telling all the other stories. Mrs. B Bouncer says, why? Then Cock says, then I suppose the gentleman you are speaking of is the same individual that I invariably meet coming upstairs when I am going down and going downstairs when I am coming up. So he has got a hint. So what he says is, that man might be the one who comes up when I go. Actually, he goes to office at 8 o'clock and that man comes up. That is, Cox goes to office at 8 o'clock in the morning and Box comes home at 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning, and they both meet in the steps or the staircase. Yeah, and then, why, yes, from the appearance of his outward man, I should unhesitantly set him down as a gentleman connected with the printing interest. So, looking at his dress, I think that he is somewhere related to the printing press, he says. Yes, sir, and a very respectable young gentleman he is. Well, good morning, Mrs. Bouncer. You'll be back at your usual time, I suppose, sir, says Mrs. Bouncer. Then Cock says, yes, 9 o'clock. You need not light my fire in future, Mrs. B. I'll do it. So he is doubting her that she is lighting the fire before. That is why the wood is getting finished. So he says, don't light my fire. I will come and light it. Don't finish off all my resources, he is telling. Yeah, a penny worth of milk, Mrs. Bouncer, and be good enough to let it stand. I shall like the cream to accumulate. So he says to get the milk and let the cream accumulate on the milk. Then Mrs. Bay says, he's gone at last. Really, I am all in a tremble for fear Mr. Box would come in before Mr. Cox went out. And this Cox goes to office, and now comes Mr. Box. So she was afraid this fellow is going on talking. Will he stay here till Mr. Box comes? That was a tension in her mind. Luckily, that did not happen. Cox went off. Now it was time for Box to come. Because Mr. Box is hard at work in newspaper office all night and doesn't come home till the morning, and Mr. Cox is busy making hats all day long, and he doesn't come home till night, so that I am getting double rent for my room, and neither of my lodgers is any wiser for it. It was a capital idea of mine, that it was, but I haven't an instant to lose. First of all, let me put Mr. Cox's things out of Mr. Box's way. So what she does, as soon as this Cox goes to office or to the hat shop, she removes all the things and places them as per Box convenience. Now then, to put the key where Mr. Cox always finds it, I really must beg Mr. Box not to smoke so much. I was so dreadfully puzzled to know what to say when Mr. Cox spoke about it. Now then, to make the bed, and don't let me forget that what's the head of the bed for Mr. Cox becomes the foot of the bed for Mr. Box. People's tastes do differ. So, the idea of Mr. Cox presuming to complain of such a bolster as this. Now look, what happens is, whichever side Cox keeps the head, that side Box keeps the leg. Okay, so they take the other direction. Cox takes maybe east, he puts the head, and west he puts the leg, and Mr. Box, east he puts the leg and west he puts the head. So that is why he is telling the bolster is like that, because Box keeps the leg in the middle, it has come down inside. Okay, so that's the reason. Now she is arranging all the things convenient for Box. Now Box says, why don't you keep your own side of the staircase, sir? And then, it was as much as your fault as mine, sir. I say, sir, it was as much as your fault as mine, sir. And Mrs. Bouncer says, Lord, my Box, what is the matter? Now when they are crossing in the steps, Box and Cox are arguing. And then Mrs. Bouncer is pacifying them. Then Box says, mind your own business, Bouncer. And Mrs. Bouncer says, dear, my Box, what a temper you are in, to be sure. You are quite pale in the face. And Box says, what color would you have a man be who has been setting up long leaders for a daily paper all night? And then Mrs. Bouncer says, but then you have all the day to yourself. Box says, so it seems. Far be it from me, Bouncer, to hurry your movements, but I think it right to acquaint you with my immediate intention of divesting myself of my garments and going to bed. So he says, please, I have worked all through the night and now I want to sleep. Please make a move so that I can sleep peacefully, says Mr. Box. Mrs. Bouncer says, oh, Mr. Box, Box says, stop. Can you inform me who the individual is that I invariably encounter going downstairs when I am coming up and coming upstairs when I am going down? So he is inquiring about Mr. Cox. And Mrs. Bouncer says, oh yes, the gentleman in the attic. Now she says that Cox stays in the attic. Again the same old story she is telling. Yeah. And Box says, oh, there's nothing particularly remarkable about him except his hats. I meet him in all sorts of hats, white hats and black hats, hats with broad brims, hats with narrow brims, hats with naps and hats without naps. In short, I have come to the conclusion that he must be individually and professionally associated with the hatting interest. So he also guesses what the profession of Mr. Cox is. So he says, I think he works something in a place related to hats because I see him wearing different hats. And Mrs. Bouncer says, yes sir. And by the by, Mr. Box, he begged me to request of you as a particular favor that you would not smoke quite so much. He begged me to request of you as a particular favor that you would not smoke quite so much. So she is making the request not to smoke so much. And Box says, did he? Then you may tell the gentle hatter with my compliments that if he objects to the smell of the tobacco, he had better domesticate himself in some adjoining parish. So he says, if he hates smoke so much, go and ask him to go and stay in a church where no one smokes, he says. And Mrs. Bouncer says, oh Mr. Box, you surely wouldn't deprive me of a lodger. No, please don't tell, I am getting rent from him. Don't tell like that, she says. It would come to precisely the same thing, Bouncer, because if I detect the slightest attempt on your part to put my pipe out, I at once give you warning, and I shall give you warning at once. Well, Mr. Box, do you want anything more of me? Says Mrs. Bouncer. Then Box says, on the contrary, I have had quite enough of you. Then Mrs. Bouncer says, well, I never. What next? I wonder. So he is telling that he will smoke as much as he is smoking. He is not going to stop. Yeah. And then Box says, it's quite extraordinary the trouble I always have to get rid of that venerable female. So he doesn't like Mrs. Bouncer because she is always interfering in all the things. Actually, what she is doing, after Cox goes, she is arranging the room in the way where Box doesn't get a doubt that there is someone else staying in the room in the night. So that is her way. This Mr. Box thinks that she is interfering so much. She knows I am up all night and yet she seems to set her face against my indulging in a horizontal position by day. Now let me see. Shall I take my nap before I swallow my breakfast, or shall I take my breakfast before I swallow my nap? I mean, shall I swallow my nap before? No, never mind. I got a rasher of bacon somewhere. So he says, now he came from office. He was very tired. So I was thinking whether I can take a small sleep, power nap, and later have a breakfast, or first let me have a sleep. He is just trying to decide, and then he remembers there is a bacon. Let me eat it first. I had the most distinct and vivid recollection of having purchased a rasher of a bacon. Oh, here it is. And a 2-penny roll. The next thing is to light the fire. Where are my matches? Now upon my life, this is too bad of Bouncer. This is by several degrees too bad. I had a whole box full 3 days ago, and now there is only one. Now look, his matches are all gone. He had 3 boxes full. Now everything is gone. I am perfectly aware that she prolongs my coal and my candles and my sugar. But I didn't think, oh yes, I did think that my matches would be sacred. So his things are also disappearing. And then now I should like to ask my unprejudiced person or persons their opinion touching this candle in the first place. Candle is an article that I don't require because I am only at home in the daytime. And I bought this candle on the first day of May, calculating that it would last me 3 months. And here's 1 week not half over and the candle 3 parts gone. So what he is saying is he had brought the candle. Who? Mr. Box. He had bought the candle, and as he doesn't stay in the night, there is no use of the candle. It should be as it is. He thought it will go for 3 months, but it is getting over. It is getting finished. And then Mrs. Bouncer has been using my gridiron. The last article of consumption that I cooked on it was a pork chop, and now it is powerfully impregnated with the odor of red herrings. Now what is telling? Maybe this lady is using the grill. This lady is using the griller, because last time I heated pork chop there, and now I smell the smell of red herrings. Okay, so it's not what I used. How sleepy I am, to be sure. I would indulge myself with a nap. If there was anybody here to superintend the turning of my bacon, perhaps it will turn itself. I must lie down. So here he goes. So he puts the bacon on the stove and he goes to sleep. Then, well, so Cox now says, after a short pause, enter Cox hurriedly. Now what happened actually is he wanted to heat the bacon, but he is very tired because he did the night shift. He lies down on the bed, closing the curtains round him. After a short pause, enter Cox hurriedly. What is this? Cox went to the shop and he should come in the night, but Cox is coming. Well, wonders will never cease. Conscious of being 11 times and a half behind time, I was sneaking into the shop in a state of considerable excitement when my venerable employer, with a smile of extreme benevolence on his aged countenance, said to me, "Cox, I shan't want you today. You can have a holiday." Thoughts of Gravesend and back fare 1 shilling instantly suggested themselves, intermingled with visions of Greenwich for 4 pence. Then came the 2-penny buses and penny boards in short. I am quite bewildered. However, I must have my breakfast first. That will give me time to reflect. I bought a mutton chop, so I shan't want any dinner. Good gracious, I have forgot the bread. Hello, what's this? A roll, I declare. Come, that's lucky. Now then, to light the fire. Hello. Oh, seeing the matchbox on the table, who presumes to touch my box of matches? Why, it's empty. I left one in it. I'll take my oath, I did. Well, I'm blessed. The fireplace is alight already. Where is the gridiron? On the fire, I declare. And what's on it? Bacon? Bacon it is. Well, now, upon my life, there is a quiet coolness about Mrs. Bounce's proceedings that's almost amusing. She takes my match, my coals and my gridiron to cook her breakfast by. No, I can't stand this. Come out of that. Now then, for my breakfast things. So what happened is Cox came early because his owner gave him a holiday. Okay, Cox got a holiday. Now in this house, already box is lying down. Okay, box is already on the bed. Okay, and then what happened? Cox is entering. When Cox came, on the fireplace there is already bacon. Fire is already lit. So he thinks that this is done by Mrs. Bouncer. He doesn't know that there is another man staying in his room. So he thinks it is Mrs. Bouncer. Pokes fork into bacon and puts it on a plate on the table. Then places his chop on the gridiron, which he puts on the fire. Now he removes the bacon aside and he puts whatever he has brought and places his chop. He puts the chop on the griller, on the grid. Okay, and then which he puts on fire. Now then, for my breakfast things. Taking key from the ledge of the door, opens door of the left hand store cupboard and goes out, slamming the door after him with a loud noise. Then Box, suddenly showing his head from behind the curtains. Come in, if it's you, Mrs. Bouncer, you need not be afraid. I wonder how long I have been asleep. Goodness gracious, my bacon. Hello, what is this? A chop. Whose chop? Mrs. Bouncer's? I'll be bound. Now, this Box was sleeping. And when Mr. Cox slammed the door, shutting the door very loudly, Mr. Box got up. And now he remembered, oh, I kept the bacon on the stove. I should go and turn it upside down. So he goes to the fireplace. Bacon is not there. What's there on the stove? Chop is there on the stove. And then I'll be bound. She thought to cook her breakfast while I was asleep with my coals too and my gridiron. Ha ha. But where's my bacon? Here it is. Well, upon my life, Bounce is doing it. And shall I curb my indignation? Shall I falter in my vengeance? so much of Bounce's breakfast, and now for my own. I may as well lay my breakfast things. So he is very angry because he wanted to eat. He was very hungry, and his bacon was not on the oven. It was the chop. Putting his head in quickly at the door of the left hand store. Now it is Cox. What Cox does? Come in, come in. Oh goodness, my chop. Hello, what's that? The bacon again? Oh, pooh, confound it, dash it, damn it, I can't stand this. When he goes to the stove, again there is bacon because Mr. Box came and kept the bacon. Now he is also shouting. Cox is shouting, Box is shouting. And then Box says, if you come to that, who are you? Then Cox says, what do you want here, sir? Then Box says, if you come to that, what do you want? Then Cox says, it's the printer. Yes, and Box says, it's the hatter. Then Cox says, go to your attic, sir. Box says, my attic, sir? Your attic. So actually, Bouncer says that to Cox that Box is in the attic. She said to Box that Cox is in the attic. So I say, yeah, you go to your room, you go to your room. They both are fighting. But actually, she gave one same room only for both of them that they don't know. And then, printer, I shall do you a frightful injury. Don't instantly leave my apartment. Then Box says, your apartment? You mean my apartment, you contemptible hatter, you? And then Cox says, your apartment? Ha ha, come, I like that. Look here, sir. And he produces a paper out of his pocket. Mrs. Bounce's receipt for the last week's rent, sir. So he is showing the rent receipt. And then Box says, ditto, sir. He also shows the paper. And then Cox says, thieves. Then Box says, murder, both, Mrs. Bouncer. Mrs. Bouncer, then she comes out. What is the matter? And then Box says, instantly remove the hatter. Then Cox says, immediately turn out that printer. And Mrs. Bouncer says, well, but gentlemen. And Cox says, explain. Then Box says, explain. Whose room is this? Then Cox says, yes, woman, whose room is this? And Box says, doesn't it belong to me? And Mrs. Bouncer says, no. And Cox says, there, you hear, sir, it belongs to me. And Mrs. Bouncer says, no, it belongs to both of you. Cox and Box, both of us. Now this is a big twist in the climax. What she says, this is not Box room, this is not Cox room, this belongs to both of you. So that was the one act play which ends in a comedy tone. Now I will type the question and answers and I will upload. Okay.